Black and Blue, the state of law enforcement. A special report in the wake of George Floyd's death. I'm your host, Jessica Kwong. It's been a somber few weeks in America after Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin knelt on the Black George Floyd, and he was later pronounced dead. Since his passing, there have been many Black Lives Matter protests and calls to defund departments across the nation. Today, we're going to hear from 4 former police department officers, all of them in these recent events. They all served in the force for about 20 years, and I'm honored to introduce them. We have Cleveland Bannister, who served as an officer and taught in the police academy. We have Clifton Hollingsworth, who served as a second-grade detective and also as director of public safety at Monroe College. Darryl Jarvis, who worked as a detective and also served as director of public safety at Monroe College. And finally, Raymond Benitez, who served as a sergeant. Welcome all to the show. Thank you so much for spending this time with me this afternoon. How are y'all today?
Fine.
Great. Well, I want to get all your perspectives on the incident that sparked all of these protests and activism. There's video footage that shows Floyd saying, "I can't breathe and I'm going to die." And yet Chauvin knelt on Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes, and all 4 officers have been facing charges since this happened. Do you think what they did was warranted, or did they act in a way that was outside of what they had as an authority as police officers?
I'll answer that. Basically, what they did wasn't warranted. The biggest problem with what went on was it went against the department rule that they had, and it went against just the moral code of how anything is supposed to be done when it comes to dealing with prisoners. Mr. Floyd was already in cuffs. Mr. Floyd was already being detained. Mr. Floyd, as a matter of fact, was placed in the back of the police car. He decided to, I guess, flail his arm and leg, and from what I understand, he was a large individual. And what ended up happening next was they took him out the car, and they basically put him on his stomach and basically tried to restrain him. This is where it all went bad. What they basically did was take his oxygen away. The police officer Chauvin pressed his knee right against his carotid artery, which basically is the effectiveness of a sleeper hold.
You know, you hear him saying many times that he can't breathe, that please get off him, and it
takes 20 seconds to put someone to sleep in a sleeper hold. So just imagine being in that position for 9 minutes. Oxygen stops going to the head, as well as the second officer, who was a rookie. The compressions were also being done to his back. So you have somebody on your back, somebody on your neck. The chances of surviving that for 3 minutes are second to none. So that's where I stand on what was it right? Was it wrong? Was it moral or immoral? It was all of the above.
So what should the officers have done? Anyone else able to weigh in on what the proper course of action should have been in that case?
They should have just placed them in the vehicle. Once they're in the backseat of a vehicle, they can kick and scream and all they want to, and you monitor what's going on in the backseat. But the backseat has a wall in between the driver and the passengers in the backseat, so the drivers couldn't get hurt like that. The passenger police officer couldn't get hurt like that. Just take them as quickly as you can to the precinct, and that's how we were all trained. I want Cliff to chime in also, but I want Ray to say something as a supervisor coming onto a scene and seeing that. What would be your first reaction, Ray?
Well, it was very obvious that what we saw was psychopathy. There was something really wrong with this officer Chauvin over here, and he decided to do something that was just beyond anything that you could see. It was very inhumane. But be that as it may, as Darryl was saying, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to secure the prisoner as best as you possibly can. You really want to get him away from the public as quickly as you possibly can and go forth with anything, because if you stay in a public setting for too long, you're going to allow yourself to come under scrutiny. Now, He was a very large man, clearly he was. But if he were as problematic and as troublesome as he was, if he were to be placed inside the police car, and then he decided to act in a way that was indicative of somebody who being emotionally disturbed, if he was in the car and you secured the vehicle, then the only person that could actually, or the only thing that could actually be damaged is the vehicle, which could be easily replaced, but he could be hurt. Now, what you can do is you can call emergency services, or you can call whatever unit that they have that could deal with somebody who is emotionally disturbed and under arrest. But you remove yourself from your situation, and this way, you're not going to get hurt, and you also are not in a position to hurt the individual, or at least because everybody could say, you know what, the police put the man in the car and he was acting in a very incoherent and a very aggressive manner. But at least they were very mindful of his personhood, of his humanity, which is what we didn't see in Milwaukee the other day. Did you understand that? Was I talking too much? I'm not sure.
No, can you weigh in on this? I'd like to hear your perspective on this.
So, my perspective, and I thank you for, first of all, having me on. My perspective is that they did nothing that was according to the policies and procedures that they have out there. This had to do with a mindset of a officer, Chavez, who had 18 civilian complaints prior to this incident, who had a mindset that he didn't really care about the individual that he was, his sworn duty is to serve and protect. There was no threat to him whatsoever. He chose to do what he did. Those officers that were there, regardless whether they have 1 day on the job or 4 years on the job, they have a responsibility to serve and to protect the people that they are patrolling. None of them did that. None of them gave him first aid and rendered to him once he was unconscious. This is unthinkable. This is an act of modern day lynching when it comes down to that. They did nothing with the procedures according to their rules and regulations of patrol guide. It was so inhumane, that act itself. And I'm upset about it because I have nephews, I have brothers, I have 4 sons. I understand what this is about. It's a mindset. You know, I'm upset and outraged over what happened. There's no justification for this whatsoever. This man was not fighting. He was pleading, begging and pleading for his life.
Clifton, you talked about these rules and regulations that are placed so that officers know, you know, how far they can do certain things. Is that something that is across police departments across the nation, or is it specific to each city like Minneapolis or New York? There's just basic understanding across the nation.
Each municipality has their own procedures. The one thing that is should be across all policing, to not put your knee on someone's neck with all your weight for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know you are inflicting bodily pain to that person, and you can cause his death. And that's what he chose to do. And all those who participated didn't stop them are as guilty as he is.
Yes, I let me chime in here for a second, Jessica.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. So Cliff and myself were partners for a while in the 84th Precinct Detective Squad, and we've been out where, see, we worked together for a long time. After the detective squad, we worked together at Monroe College, but we worked together so well because we have checks and balances on each other. I'm more hothead than Cliff is. Cliff is a schmoozer. Cliff talks it down. That's what he does, and that's his power. That's one of the things. So when he sees me out there, my fuse is not as long as his. All right. So we can take people trying to get in the way of us doing our job. He can take it more than I can. But the checks and balances that are in place is when you have a partner, the partner's supposed to check you. And that's what didn't happen. That's what didn't happen. The young guys were afraid to check him. They were afraid to check him. And one or two, I believe, one or two of the officers said, well, you think we should get off of him? You think we should turn him over? When he couldn't breathe. But he was having none of it. He didn't respond to anyone. He just did what he wanted to do, shifted his weight, repositioned his weight so he got more weight on his neck. I was in shock watching it. I've never seen anything like that in my life. Never seen anything like that in my life. That's incredible.
Clifton, you're a founding member of 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement, a New York City-based advocacy group that focuses on fighting injustices between the African American community and the interactions with NYPD. I know that the group speaks out against police brutality, racial profiling, and police misconduct. Has the group done anything in response to Floyd's death?
Well, the group has a radio program, a TV program actually. It's called Black Cops. And we're on that as well. That's in Manhattan. We've been speaking out in terms of that. But the group itself has always been active in terms of how to bridge the gap between the community in which it serves and the police department. 20 years ago, when Amadou Diallo was shot 41 times, when Abner Louima was violated in the precinct, when Malcolm Ferguson had his situation, we've had numerous of times that we spoke out on the racial profiling that New York City Department has, and the department has said racism doesn't exist in this department. If it exists all over the world, why wouldn't it exist in the department? One of the things that I go out and do, I do what to do when stopped by police. So a lot of times it's not a race, it's your prejudice. You prejudge a person based on the color of their skin, the time of day it is, what they're wearing. These are the prejudice that come in to the department. So my belief is that the department needs to check itself. You cannot send someone out with a gun and shield and expect him to be the same person 20 years later. So there's checks and balances that the police departments all over the nation should do in terms of having you come in, talk to you, see what your psychic is like, see what your mindset is like, to take you off the road, to be in the communities. This is the other thing. They're not working in the community or living in the communities that they work in. So you're disconnected. So we need to start doing things with police reform all over the nation.
I know that you've all shared personal feelings about Floyd's death, and it seems like you're all outraged about what happened. Have any of you done anything about it to show your views? I mean, I don't know if it's a participate in protests. For example, for journalists, news reporters especially, we're not supposed to participate in protests because we strive to be as unbiased as possible. I'm wondering, for people who have retired from the force, are you allowed to participate in protests or chosen to do so?
Well, I mean, basically, I'll answer that. Well, what I've done or what I've tried to do is in New York City 2 weeks ago, I organized, well, it all started with the young lady that we were calling Central Park Karen with the dog, who had called the police on the gentleman who was bird watching, and he asked her to put her dog on the chain. And so I called a press conference for that, and it blossomed into last week myself, the Borough President Eric Adams, who's the other founding member of 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement, and another community advocate, Tony Herbert. We decided to call a meeting at the 88th Precinct, where we basically said what needed to be done in the police department, what we wanted to be done in the police department, and that we had to try to bridge the gap. And that was what I was able to do and put together with the help of Eric Adams and Tony Herbert. I then, from that blossom, Sarah Wallace from Channel 4 News last week called me and asked me would I come speak to her for an hour, and we went up in the park, and she did an exclusive interview with myself and another active police officer in terms of what was done, what has to be done, and what should be done immediately to bridge that gap between the police department, the community, and make them work together as one. So I've definitely tried to be out there in the public and do what I have to do in the public eye.
If you would like to protest, are retired officers allowed to protest, or is
Yes.
there?
Yes, they can.
Part of the department, we can protest.
Okay.
So I can also tell you, it is your civil rights and civil duty, if you choose to do so, and protest even when you are still a police officer.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
It's a very thin line. You have to be able to back what you're doing. So if you're locked up because of civil unrest, it's not going to fare very well for you. But as a member of law enforcement, we've always have gone out and protested, peacefully protested, because of civil rights. But the thing is, you can't just follow anyone. You can't follow a crowd and be drawn into something that you're not ready for. You have to know who's leading that protest. And honestly speaking, you should be one of the leaders who are leading the protest, so it will be a peaceful protest. Yes, you can do it. It's not going to fare very well for you if you get arrested for civil unrest. But it is your rights, indeed your rights. You don't lose your rights once you become a police officer. There's just certain things that you know won't fare very well for you on the job that you do.
I think that's important for the public to know, because usually the public just sees police officers in uniform and they don't really know if they can participate or if they can express their views. So thank you for sharing that.
Yes, they can. He's gotten some feedback from that too, some push.
Definitely.
And he had a good detectives delegate in his corner though, so he was all right. that happened to be me anyway.
Council, 18 days after Floyd's death, they unanimously passed a resolution to replace the police department with a community-led public safety system. What do you think about these plans to disband police departments across the U.S.?
Let me answer that. First of all, the word disband really makes no sense, because if you disband, you said, all right, there's no more New York City Police Department, then what? You know, the thought that you can disband the police department. I heard one young lady say on television that disband the police department, we can protect ourselves. We don't
believe that. I fear safety sometimes, honestly. I want someone to protect me.
Exactly. So it's more so, I think what everybody really wants is, let's restructure the police department. Let's restructure policing. Let's restructure how people think about it. And I'd like Ray to speak on this, because Ray, his intellect is a little different. Me and Ray were in the same academy class when we went to the police academy. Ray's always been a learned guy. He has an MA in education. So educating is what he does. So I'd like him to chime in on that.
Well, you know what? Darryl flatters me so much, and it works well. You know, he flatters me, and I pick up the checks. So keep it up, Darryl. It's doing good for you. No, but anyway, what I'd like to say about this, there's a difference between defunding and disbanding. And they've actually disbanded police. Like if you go to Camden, New Jersey, because the city was about to go bankrupt. And basically all the public services areas were going to be disbanded, but they got rehired. But they were rehired and they were restructured, and it was done in such a way and they also had a very poor, or at least reportedly so, they had a very questionable history with police community relations. And they said that was something that had to be addressed. So they basically just stopped everything and then restructured, like Darryl was saying. When they're talking about defunding, what they're actually trying to do is reallocate monies that would be going somewhere and now it's going to be going to and utilized by a different agency. And I'm sure everybody on this panel can say that we were all police officers in the 1980s. Back in New York City, it was a very difficult time. It was a very trying time. And we ran into a lot of people that were in distress, but that necessarily didn't mean they were criminals. However, the prevailing sentiment is that just because you had a drug habit, you were going to be treated like a criminal, when you should have been treated like somebody who had a drug habit. So those were ethically, it was very challenging for people like Darryl and Cliff and I, when we see things like this, because we just saw that we thought that was something averse to the way that we believed personally, that this was something to do. But the way it was done was that if somebody was clearly drug addicted and needed drug rehabilitation, that they would be going down to central booking all too often for a whole host of reasons.
I'd like Cleve to speak on it also, because, and Cleve, explain to us how the teaching in the police academy translated into the actions on the street when you went through.
Well, in the police academy, when I came out, it was, it was different. I mean, the thing was, we were told, when I came out, it was the Rodney King had just occurred. So we got to see the results as a student of what would happen or what could happen when people of color saw an injustice. And as that trial was going on, and at the end of that trial, I was just, like I said, coming out the police academy. And so it affected us in a way of, we didn't want any parts of that type of atmosphere. And so those cops that came out with me, I think we had a little more focus and we were a little more disciplined. But like anything else, if things aren't reinforced and if history isn't studied, it can tend to repeat itself. And what we saw with Floyd and what we've constantly seen since '92 is history repeating itself. And I think that's why the frustration has gotten to the point where now we have these protests and now we have civil unrest because, people are tired. And I will say this for the police department also. The 98% of good cops out there, they're tired of it also. So right now, everybody's looking for an answer and looking for that bridge and looking to come to peace. The problem is, where does it start and who does it start with? And my answer to that is it starts with all of us. It starts with all of us as retired cops, as active police officers, and as, like I said, 98% of the police officers and 98% of our communities are made up of people who don't want war and who, let me say this, they want to be policed. But people in the inner city and blacks across the country want to be policed like everyone else of every other culture, race, and religion is policed with respect, with compassion, and with love.
Great. Well, thank you so much for those thoughts. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back with Black and Blue State of Law Enforcement.
We have to stay home.
Not just to protect yourself, but to protect others.
Stay at least 6 feet away from other people. 2, arm's length. Just because you're at home
doesn't mean that we can't be alone together.
Welcome back to Black and Blue, the State of Law Enforcement, a special report in the wake of George Floyd's death. I'm your host, Jessica Kwong, still here with 4 former New York Police Department officers. Thanks again for joining me, and let's continue our conversation on this topic. Darryl, you had a few questions for your colleagues here. So
Cleve, I'd like you to speak to, during your time as an instructor in the New York City Police Academy, how you were taught to deal with, or how you were told to deal with teaching the future police officers and future supervisors how to deal with social issues, how to deal with their communities, how to police in communities that might not be ethnically where they come from. How did they deal with that? How did they tell you to deal with it?
Well, basically, what happened was in the curriculum, we basically had behavioral science, police science and law. The behavioral science aspect of it was always, and herein lies the problem. The behavioral science aspect of it was always seen, it was always told to be like silly science. That's what they would call it. But actually, it was the most important part of the curriculum. And it was the most important part because this is where we taught cultural diversity. This is where we taught how to deal with the communities, how to react. We taught victimology. We taught the psychology and about the mores and folkways of people coming from their own socialization process and now moving into communities of color and communities that you weren't familiar with. And now you have to now, for 8 hours and 35 minutes, come in there, be impartial, put your personal beliefs, all your isms, all your biases aside, and police everyone as one and the same. That was the goal, and that's what was supposed to happen. Now, I would say in 85 to 90% of it, when people are in the academy, they get it. It's the practical application that is the problem with most police officers. When you're new on the job, you're going to say yes to everything. You're going to agree that everyone has rights and everyone biases are wrong.
Well, Clifton, Darryl, Raymond, and also Cleveland, thank you so much for your time. We're going to take a break. We're going to continue this next time. And thank you all for tuning in for this episode of Black and Blue, the State of Law.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be back next time.
Right.